This is the fourth and final chapter of the module on credit-linked notes, consisting of 6 quiz questions to test your understanding of the materials. Question 1. You have issued a second to default CLN linked to 2 credits with 0 default correlation, equal probabilities of defaulting, PD, and an expected recovery value each, RV, of 60%. Sometime later, you need to mark-to-market the position, and you are informed that, first, the credits are now deemed to be positively correlated. Second, that the RV is now expected to be 50%. And third, that the PD for each credit has risen. Of these 3 changes, which will be favorable to you and which will be unfavorable? Here are the 4 possible answers. Solution to question 1. The diagram we saw in chapter 3 is reproduced here and confirms that the issuer of the STD is long PD, short RV, and long correlation, these 3 positions being highlighted in bold in this table. We know that correlation and PD have risen, which therefore generate gains for the issuer, while recovery value has fallen, which also generates gains. So the correct answer is B, i.e. that all 3 factors are favorable to the issuer. Question 2. You have been offered a choice between 2 FTD notes, first to default notes, each linked to a different basket of reference entities. Basket A consists of 4 reference entities, each of which has a default probability of 1% and an expected recovery value of 50%. Basket B consists of 3 reference entities, each of which has a default probability of 2% and an expected recovery value of 20%. In each basket, the notional amount of each reference entity is $100, which is also the face value of each note offered to you. You know that the default correlations in basket A are 0. Which basket should pay the highest spread? Here are the 4 possible answers. Solution to question 2. We remind you that when default correlation is 0, the probability that either A or B defaults is roughly the sum of their individual default probabilities. And this can be extended to the case with 4 reference entities, such as we have for basket A. Thus, the expected loss for the basket A linked FTD is around 4 times 1% times 1 minus the recovery value, which is equal to 2%. Turning to the second CLN, since we do not know the default correlations for basket B, we will proceed to calculate that note's expected loss under the 2 extreme assumptions of 0 default correlation and then 100%. For the case of zero default correlation, the basket B linked note has an expected loss of around 3 number of reference entities times the 2% default probability for each reference entity times 1 minus the recovery value, which is 4.8%, therefore higher than for basket A. If now we turn to the case 100% default correlation, the expected loss for the basket B FTD would be around 2%, the default probability of each reference entity, simply multiplied by 1 minus the recovery value. Just to remind you, the case of 100% default correlation is the case where each circle in our previous Venn diagrams showing the default risk of each entity has come to overlap completely the circles for the other reference entities, and therefore there is no longer any distinction between the reference entities. This calculation gives us a result of 1.6% for the expected loss, which is lower than for basket A. Therefore, the default correlation for basket B does affect the outcome, and therefore the correct answer to this question is D as in David. Question 3. You buy a CLN issued directly by a bank rated AA, referring to 3 reference entities rated single A, triple B, and double B respectively. Which of the following statements is true regarding the credit rating of the CLN? Your 4 possible answers appear now. Solution to question 3. The CLN is at least as risky as a direct investment in the double B rated entity, since a default by that entity hurts the investor in the CLN just as much as under the direct investment. Exposure, in addition to the issuing bank and to the other 2 reference entities, increases the investor's risk, but by moderate amounts given the relatively solid ratings of these entities. Therefore, the maximum credit rating for the CLN is double B, but it may be lower if the addition of these credit risks pulls the expected loss of the investment into a lower category, or band as we called them earlier. Therefore, the correct answer to this question is D as in David. Question 4. Which of the following could be a reason for preferring a direct issue CLN over a regular bond issued by the same reference entity? Here are your 4 possible answers. Solution to question 4. The CLN carries as much credit exposure to the reference entity as does the regular bond, if not slightly more. So A is wrong. The CLN carries exposure to the CLN issuer, which the regular bond does not. So B is also wrong. The CLN is typically less liquid than a regular bond, so C is wrong. Finally, the CLN maturity can be customized to be whatever the two parties agree, so D is correct. Question 5. A credit-linked note is issued by an SPV which invests the proceeds raised in securities yielding LIBOR plus 5, then sells protection on Alcatel in the CDS market when the spread bid offer is 240-250 in basis points. The annual administrative costs of the SPV are 10 basis points, which are paid from the annual cash flows received by the SPV. Assuming no other fees, costs, or other expenses to be paid, what should be the coupon on the CLN issued by the SPV linked to Alcatel? Here are your 4 possible answers. Solution to question 5. This diagram shows the cash flows under the CLN, including the initial transfer of $100 from the note holder to the SPV and the issuance of the CLN at LIBOR plus some spread that we will try to determine. The diagram goes on to reveal that the SPV earns LIBOR plus 5 from the securities purchased and another 240 basis points from the Alcatel CDS, this being correctly the bid side of the market, but 10 basis points are paid out by the SPV for administrative costs. Therefore, the yield that the SPV could pay on the note is LIBOR plus 5 plus 240 minus 10, all in basis points, which equals LIBOR plus 235, and therefore the correct answer is A, as in apple. Question 6. The one-year credit spreads for A and B are 50 basis points and 80 basis points respectively. Expected loss following a credit event is 25% for both. You buy their one-year bonds and issue a one-year FTD and a one-year STD, all structured exactly as before. The FTD is priced at a default correlation of 20%, while the STD is priced at a default correlation of 40%. What is the economic outcome from your perspective? You may use any worksheet that you like. The 4 possible answers now appear. Solution to question 6. We must first remember that since the CDS spread for 1 year is calculated as PD times 1 minus RD, we can infer the default probability by dividing the spread by 1 minus RV. We must also be careful to input a recovery value here of 75%, since the question specified that the assumed loss following a credit event would be 25%. Applying now the formula above, we can calculate for company A PD of 2% to get the spread of 50 basis points mentioned in the question, and for company B, a spread of 3.2% to get the correct CDS spread of 80 basis points. Pricing the FTD assuming a 20% default correlation indicates a spread of 1.16%, while pricing the STD, second to default, assuming a 40% correlation, indicates a spread of 26 basis points. So the end result is that you earn 50 basis points on your CDS on company A, another 80 basis points from your CDS on company B, but pay out the sum of the 116 and the 0.26 that we just calculated. The net result is a loss of 12 basis points. Therefore, the correct answer is B as in boy. This completes the quiz as well as the entire module on credit-linked notes.